What Hawaii public employees need to know about EUTF medical costs in retirement. Let's break it down on this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. Today's episode, we're talking about the EUTF medical for retirees for our state and city and county workers. And I thought this was a good episode, a good topic to cover, because I think it's oftentimes misunderstood, and I think people don't understand the kind of the premiums and contributions, the years of credible service, and what all goes into the modern day EUTF medical. And when I say modern day, I say that because a lot of people know that previously for state and city and county employees, the EUTF medical benefits used to be fully paid, right? If you had over 10 years of service for you and your spouse, right, it would be 100% paid. And that is quite the deal. That's no longer there. And rightfully so. I mean, that's an amazing benefit. But, you know, we all know that health insurance and medical costs, they aren't cheap, right? And so this Hawaii Employer Union Health Benefits Trust Fund, which is the EUTF, has to operate through contributions, right, from employees while they're working. And it has to be able to sustain and pay out benefits and support through contributions and other means, right? If they were to continue to offer completely free medical to retirees and their spouses, I don't think it would be sustainable long-term for the program to continue. So they had to make some adjustments, and they've made a couple adjustments throughout the years. So I guess just to touch on that here first, if you were hired on or before June 30th, 1996, okay, that's when you had the really great medical. And what I'm going to kind of reference here is the employer contributions table of the EUTF, and you can find all of this stuff is just readily available for you at eutf.hawaii.gov. And there's a ton of resources there for future retirees, for current retirees, for active state and city and county workers for their medical. And what I pulled up here is the employer contribution table, right? So this is what the EUTF is going to pay on your behalf for your medical in retirement. And like I said, if you were hired on or before June 30th, 1996, that's when you had the best situation, because if you had less than 10 years of service, credible service, I believe probably the minimum then was 5 years to be vested in this retirement system, then the EUTF would pay half of your medical benefits. And then if you had over 10 years of credible service, and again, you were hired before June 30th, 1996, 10 or more years, you were 100% covered, and so was your spouse. Now let's pivot to the next two segments of the EUTF medical calculation. And for these next two segments, the amount of contributions given your credible years of service is exactly the same. The difference is for the later segment, the EUTF no longer does the contribution rate on behalf of your spouse, right? It's only for a self rate. So the middle rate is, again, from that, your start date is between June 30th, 1996, all the way to June 30th, 2001. And from there, you need 10 years of credible service, which is excluding sick leave. Sick leave can't be used to bump you up to those years for the EUTF calculation. So you need 10 years of credible service. And if you have between 10 and 15 years, EUTF would cover 50% of your medical as well as your spouse if you're in that in-between segment. 15 to 25 years, they'll cover 75%. And if you have over 25 years of service in this middle segment, 1996 to 2001, they will cover 100% of your employer contributions, right? They'll cover everything for your EUTF medical as a retiree. Now, those years and percentages, like I said, also pertain to the hired on June 30th, 2001 or later, right? Anybody hired July 1st, 2001 or later has the same percentages. Less than 10 years, and the employer is not going to contribute anything. 10 to 15 years, 50%. 15 to 25 years, 75%. 25 years or more, and they're going to cover 100%. But like I said, the difference is if you were hired in that last segment, July 1st, 2001 or later, then these employer contributions are only going to pertain to your self rate, not your, spouse as well. So those are the big differences. So you can go to the website eutf.hawaii.gov, look for the employer contribution table, and you'll see it broken down into these three segments: hired on or before June 30th, 1996, on or between July 1st, 1996 to June 30th, 2001, and then anybody hired after that, after July 1st, 2001 and on. Those are our three segments. The percentages for the last two segments are exactly the same as far as years of service and percentages. Difference being that for the last segment, those hired July 1st, 2001 and later, those percentage of employer contributions for your medical only pertain to the self rate. They no longer pertain to the a spouse in retirement. There's a lot of good information on this EUTF Hawaii.gov website. There are these worksheets as well where you can find these worksheets, and there's two options, right? If you were hired before 2001 or after 2001, and it kind of lists out what the premiums will be, and these get updated, and you can see for yourself or for a two-party or a family what the monthly premiums would be, whether it's HMSA or Kaiser, and you can look at your prescription drugs and your dental, and you kind of go down this worksheet here and tally it all up, and then you figure out through your years of credible service, at the bottom of that worksheet, how much would the employer cover or contribute to cover those premiums given on your years of credible service, and whether it's just for your own or for your you and your spouse or family or whatever it might be. And you can tally it all up, and you can get a good idea of what those premiums will cost you in retirement. Additionally, there's also a great EUTF premium calculator that you can kind of go through, input some information, and it'll spit out, pretty close to what your premiums would be, or you can expect them to be in retirement. But I think the big misunderstanding is a lot of people here. I've heard some people say, "Well, I'm going to work 5 years so I get my medical," and I think that applies to federal. Federal is 5 years vested as long as you meet the minimum retirement age with 5 years. Your pension benefit won't be very much, but I do think you're eligible for medical then. But as far as state's concerned, anybody who starts working for the state now has to work 10 years just to get the 50% self-only rate of employer contributions to the medical. And if somebody wants 100% covered for their medical and they want to work for the state to get that medical in retirement, if they start after July 1st, 2001, they got to work 25 years or more. Now, with that being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as long as you qualify for the group health benefit, right, you may benefit from just lower premiums altogether, right? Even if they only cover 50% as far as employer contributions, you're still getting great benefits at kind of a group coverage rate, right? And I'd have to explore out there what's available in the marketplace to see if there's something better out there. But I think the EUTF medical is fantastic, and it's a great plan with great coverage and at a fair monthly premium. So even if you're not going to get full coverage, that shouldn't discourage you from working for the state for the benefits. That's that's one of the great things about working for the state is the 21 days vacation, 21 days sick, as well as these retirement benefits with the ERS with your pension, and then the EUTF with the medical. It's just understanding and being realistic about how much is going to be covered. And I think people shouldn't be so scared about paying for medical, bridging the gap until Medicare starts, right? When you turn 65, if you retire earlier, let's say 60, and you got this 5 years, people shouldn't be so scared about paying for medical in the marketplace. And depending on your income in retirement, you might be eligible for certain credits for your medical that you're purchasing through the marketplace. And so there's a lot of alternatives and options. But obviously, if you can get into the federal or state system, great benefits. That's what everybody knows, and great medical benefits in retirement. So I just want to touch on that. I guess with one last thing to mention is with the premiums drop pretty significantly once you reach that Medicare age, right? Because then Medicare and your state benefits, or Medicare and your federal health benefits in retirement, are kind of working together, so they can lower the premiums there. But yeah, if there's any questions or anybody wants me to follow up on anything we talked about, email it over to aloha@hawaiiretirementshow.com, and we'll catch everyone on the next one.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.